You've spoken before about the aspect of starting with temptation, but then by the time you get farther involved in the situation, there's a concept of the diabolical actually driving, basically pushing and shoving. Can you talk about how it goes from simple temptation to driving?
Sure, and I think the example that I want to use there is office flirtation. You have a lot of elements there. Let's say, for the sake of our discussion, Bob and Sally. Bob makes a couple of comments to Sally, how good she looks, etc., and they seem innocent enough. And then what happens is now Sally begins to think of Bob when she's dressing for work in the morning. Will Bob like this? Will I elicit a comment from Bob? And then Bob's going to begin to play into that. And he will give the compliment, but at the same time, he'll say things like, I like the red dress that you wore the other day better than the blue dress. The red dress may be a little bit more décolleté, a little bit more revealing. And so Bob starts through temptation, flattery, starts to shape the way that she's acting and reacting, etc. And so that's a good example of temptation. Then Bob is going to ask her, would you like to get a cup of coffee, grab a bite to eat? And Sally's going to point out, Bob, I know you're married. And he'll say, yes, but my wife doesn't understand me. And so now you've got this eliciting of compassion, whereby Sally says, sure, we can have a cup of coffee, etc. And I don't have to keep going. You see how this moves all the way to them finding themselves at the no-tell motel. And this is a progression. And at any point, Sally has to stop that because Bob is not motivated toward the good. It's clear. Sally doesn't have to discern, well, is Bob's motivation good or not? She's going to have to protect her own self as to whether she gives into the flattery, the flirtation or not. Once the flirtation becomes mutual, now you've developed psychological compatibility at a stronger level. So you see how we move from outside to inside. And that's the movement from oppression to obsession. Once he's inside, once he's got her dressing the way he is suggesting, then he begins to drive her inclinations. He knows her well enough now to know what he can say to elicit an emotional response, what he can do to elicit certain behavior. He's not doing the behavior. He's not making her do that. He's not manipulating her intellect or will directly. It's indirectly. And that's what we mean by driving. It's driving one's fallen nature, one's inclinations, one's specific sin. And so it's much like driving livestock. Modernly, we've lost that agrarian reference, and we think driving is like driving a car, whereby the driver, the pilot, takes control of an inanimate object. That's not the reference at all. So when we, Father Ripper and I, use the word drive, a point of psychology or nature, we're not saying that the demon instigates it. He takes advantage of a natural inclination. And for instance, if Sally is particularly vain about her hair, Bob's going to pick up on that. And so the hair remarks are going to be those remarks which happen first. They compromise her other faculties, her ability to resist. And then that's where he's going to drive the discussion.
Another question, is the diabolical present on both sides of the conversation?
Quite often, this is a thing we call cross-animation of spirits. In the beginning, the diabolical presence on both sides. The diabolical presence may be in Sally, who makes some looks, maybe bats her eyes, maybe affects a certain posture around Bob, and then Bob takes the bait. And once Bob shows that he has an inclination to act beyond an outside vocation, now the demon is interested in Bob. So this is how you draw a crowd or a cadre of demons to human activity. Once someone is willing to engage in behavior that is not requisite with their state in life, we call this a pattern break. When does a husband not act like a husband? When does a chaste single woman stop acting like a chaste single woman? Then that's when the demon is interested, because now you've demonstrated your willingness to act as an agent against grace, against propriety, against the natural law. You're going to demonstrate that before the demon shows up. There are no innocent victims. The demon is only going to work with those that are inclined to do the evil deed. And then he's going to push it to see how far you're willing to go. If Sally ignores Bob's advances, then that quits pretty quickly, and Bob's going to look for someone else. If Sally makes the look, bats the eyes, stands in a certain way, and Bob does not respond because he's a married man, then Sally's going to try this on someone else. One of the ways you know that this is diabolically influenced is once she breaks up Bob's marriage, she'll have no more interest in Bob. And the demon that was present to her was about breaking marriages, about breaking vocations. Often spirits of infidelity are mistaken. What they're really after is the construct of vocation, construct of sacrament. That's the demon's primary focus. It's not about Bob and Sally.
And I guess a final question is, all of this can take place without possession.
Well, most assuredly, this does take place. What I've described for you is oppression moving into obsession. The demon is an expert at minimal input for maximum return. And if he can control and destroy through oppression, then that's what he's going to do. If he can control and destroy through obsession, that's what he's going to do. Possession is not his goal. Damnation is his goal, or the denying of heaven. That is his goal. And so it is the impediment of the flow of grace. That's what he is after. And if he can do it with minimal input, you look at social media. The demon is an influencer. If he can put forward a language, a dialogue, a narrative, and an appearance that affects thousands of people, then that's precisely what he's going to do, because he has a much greater effect.
All right. Well, thank you very much for giving us some time.
Mr. Clement, I'd like to thank you for your time today. I look forward to more of these question and answers. If anybody would like to have some questions answered, they're welcome to send them to info@montecristo.net. That's info@montecristo.net.